just wanted to ask you what you make of Emily, what you make of um, the slightly bizarre, brand new, frankly deranged territorial claim over Canada, the sort of 51st state idea, where given that the fentanyl pretext for tariffs is a bit nonsense, the the trade advantages from imposing massive tariffs are non-existent. The costs are clearly pretty high. The territorial claim is a brand new one that in my reading of U.S. history, no one else has sought to litigate at all at any point in the history of the United States. I may have missed some people who wanted that to happen, but is that a real thing? I mean, there are plenty of examples of senior Trump administration officials and Trump himself saying, "Wouldn't it be nice?" And it's really hard to know whether to see it as just a not very funny joke, or um, some sort of serious proposition that it's very hard to see how it could ever be achieved. But do they think they mean it?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, the whole thing is really giving 19th century. You know what I mean? Like the whole thing is just of we're taking back, we're going to take Canada and we're going to take back the Panama Canal and we're going to rename the Gulf of Mexico. Like it's just it's like it's from another time. It also sort of reminds me of reports during COVID of Putin like being out in the wilderness socially and sort of dreaming up visions of reestablishing Russian Empire, which, as we know, ended up becoming a war. I guess, which is to say, like, I have never met any American policymaker. I have lived in the city and I've lived in DC reporting on foreign policy in DC for almost a decade now. I have never heard anybody say that it would in any way benefit US national security or any other interests to take over Canada, probably because that's insane. But I think the Canadians are absolutely right to take it really seriously. I think when Trudeau says, "I see what you're doing. You're trying to economically weaken us so that you can annex us, and we're wise to it, and it's not going to happen." Like, I think it's absolutely appropriate to do that. Do I know why Trump has decided that we need a 51st state? Or that is it personal dislike of Trudeau? Is it that there are environmental resources in Canada that he thinks that we can, energy resources that he thinks we can benefit from? Is it that he thinks it would be cool to like? It's so boring in some ways to try to get inside his head, and in some ways it doesn't matter because once he says it enough times, it becomes something you need to take seriously.
It's not only like appropriate for Canada to respond. Again, I think it speaks to a level, an approach here that's a bit harder to understand, because I would argue that were Trump just seeking to get more out of what it earns from tariffs vis-a-vis Canada, if he were to simply push Trudeau rather than Canadians themselves,
Right.
there was another party. I mean, the Conservatives were very happy to work with Trump to build themselves in the Trumpian mold. But in turning this into a Canada thing, that like negotiating wise, it's a bad hand to have played, because Trudeau is now able to sell the idea of temporary or long-term economic pain, because it's an existential issue for Canada. So it strikes me as again one of those things where actually America did have leverage here, and it's throwing it away by turning this into this petty idea of a 51st state. I mean, the big question coming out of the Zelensky meeting for I think for a lot of folks looking at how to deal with Trump is do you roll over and take the hits, because that seems to just encourage more? Do you hit back? And then, as we discussed earlier, that there's no winning, but in some ways, Trudeau and Sheinbaum in Mexico are playing this sharper, because they know that these aren't necessarily entire bluffs, But I think ultimately the hardest bit is it's just hard to read what the end game is, if there is one. And correct me if I'm wrong. There's one again reductive one on one side that sort of attempts to integrate both what's happening domestically with Doge and all of this, is that these are all just base level fiscal things. They're just trying to accrue as much money into the system as they can, regardless of what it means in the long term. One, because they've sold this idea of having these massive savings in just a couple of years, and two, because I would assume a bunch of their business prospects are built around this idea. And I'm starting to find it very hard to see it as anything else.